Okay, hey everybody. I'm Dr. John Acker. I'm your instructor for this course. We'll get to the PowerPoint in a couple of minutes. I recognize some of the names from previous classes, so those of you who are having flashbacks right now, I apologize. I promise I'm slightly less scary this time around. I have been teaching kind of on and off at SCU since 2018. I got my PhD from Ohio State in English, focusing on American literature in 2017. And shortly after that, one of the SCU staff sent out a kind of help signal and said, we need someone to teach English. So I said, hey, I can teach English. So I've enjoyed the chance to look at both the writing process and this quarter, of course, literature from a Christian perspective. My own research was on 19th century Christian novels, so kind of dovetails with that nicely. So this is an accelerated course, to say the least. We are going through everything in 8 weeks, and I know you've been advised to keep up on the reading. I'll be going through the specific assignments a little bit later today, and then each week we'll give you a preview of what's coming up. Let me get a sense now, because we had a little bit of a confusion with the scheduling for this class. Have you guys already read A Raisin in the Sun, the play?
No.
Okay, all right, then we can, I just had a one-sided discussion of that later on, but we can skip that. And I'll just focus today on kind of course procedures and sort of introduce you to what we're doing. And then if you have questions about the play as you read it for the homework this week, then feel free to reach out. We can do that. So I'm going to switch over to our lecture notes and go through this. I put a PDF version of this on the MyFire page as well. So we have a lot to get through. I'm mostly going to talk at you today, and then as we move through the quarter, we'll have more chance for actual discussion, because lecture can only get you so far. In talking about literature, you really want to figure out what everyone else thinks and how we're going to kind of arrange those interpretations and figure out what do we do with this really complex set of readings. So a little bit about the class. This is a kind of a catch-all introduction to literature. SCU has several more advanced, kind of more specific courses later in the English curriculum about specific national traditions, but we're kind of dipping in several different places. For example, we are reading a Nigerian novel called Things Fall Apart later on at the end of the quarter. We're looking at short stories and poems and a drama from both American and British authors, as well as some other kind of world literature samples. And the idea is sort of to prepare you for those courses, but also give you a sense of how to handle literary analysis in general. So you'll notice that every week your readings include both literary selections and short articles, usually websites, as well as a couple of videos that give you tools to analyze literature in more depth. Some of these will be mini presentations by other scholars. Some of them will be, a quick handout, stuff like that. And so it's sort of a piecemeal approach rather than trying to get just one textbook. The idea is that you will be applying some of these analytical models and analytical skills in your writing assignments, which I'll cover in a few minutes. But they'll also inform how we discuss the literature. I'm sure you guys have experienced this. You go through the Bible study and you sit around in a circle and everyone says, well, what do you think it means? Well, I don't know. What do you think it means? What do you think it means? Well, that's not going to get you very far. And so we're going to look this quarter at ways to see how is this stuff put together? What are some of the tools and techniques that the authors use? And what are some things that we could pay attention to understand this better? And I think this is a good setting to study literature, because literature is part of what we call the humanities. And that very simply means we're looking at human activities and kind of the expressions of how do we deal with what it means to be human. In the course description on MyFire, Dr. Beach, who designed this course, makes the point that by studying literature, we study people. And we figure out how do we understand them better, especially when they are in very different settings with very different beliefs and very different backgrounds than we might be. We've got a whole range of cultures represented in this course. But it also helps us develop empathy, because sometimes you express things and you process things in a different way in a literary or creative context than you might in a speech or in a government document or something like that. So we're going to practice how to figure that out and respond to those. And I think there is a lot of opportunity to apply our own beliefs, our own ideas, and not just to say, is this a Christian text or not, but how is it grappling with some of the themes and the questions that are important to us? I'll give you an example of that. So the first text you'll be writing about, A Raisin in the Sun, is played by Lorraine Hansberry, written in the mid-20th century. But she takes her title and kind of bases the whole play on a poem by Langston Hughes called Harlem. I want you to read that poem to you, and because I think you'll pick up some themes that you've seen in other contexts, including the Bible. This is Hughes' poem. What happens to a dream deferred? Does it dry up like a raisin in the sun, or fester like a sore and then run? Does it stink like rotten meat, or crust and sugar over like a syrupy sweet? Maybe it just sags like a heavy load, or does it explode? So it's a short poem, but I think we could compare the language and sort of the attitude to stuff we see, for example, in Isaiah and Jeremiah. Certainly in Psalms, a lot of that book is David saying, why is life so stinking hard? And why are people trying to kill me? Hopefully you can't exactly echo those statements, but I think that Hughes and in a different way, Hansberry are tapping into those same questions. So what I hope you get out of this course is a couple of things. One, a chance to apply the writing skills you already have. So most of you have already taken 1133 and 1233. Some of you with me, some with other professors. And so we're going to use those writing skills, still be working on thesis statements and evidence and all that fun stuff. And it'll also prepare you to read better. So you may go on, depending on your major and your interest, to take other English courses, but you will be reading other creative work, at least in church, if nowhere else. There's a good book called How to Read, I think it's How to Read the Bible for All It's Worth, Fee and Stewart. And they look at how does the Bible use literary genres and forms. The same stuff we'll be studying this quarter. So if you're in Old Testament or New Testament, or if you are a ministry major, which is, I think, still most of the SEU population, this will be helpful in understanding those texts better. In terms of our materials, of course, MyFire is our main stop. This is a hybrid class. I sent you a PDF file of Things Fall Apart on, I believe, October 9th. If you did not get that email for some reason, please contact me and I will send it your way. We have links to our other readings on MyFire. I can give you in the announcements page, there is a doc file that has those links collected. They're also in the content section. But it's a bit of a pain to pull up links for every single one because they're not always in a consistent format, and some of them are a bit harder to read. So I sent you also a link to an anthology that has all of the other readings. If you want to buy that, it's on Amazon, but it's a little expensive, so I figured we could save some time and money there. The anthology is the Norton Reader. It is the 13th edition. As with all of your hybrid classes, you will use MyFire extensively. So that's where you're going to turn in your homework, and I'll show you a few resources on that in a minute here. And that's where I'm going to send you your feedback on your papers. So get in the habit of logging in every day. You can email me at jtacker@scu.edu if you have any questions about the course. I will be posting, lecture videos. So recording this one, I'll put this up on my YouTube channel, the link there. And basically those are going to be short videos to kind of introduce you to the work for that week. So they'll be up in time for you to prepare for the stuff coming up, because there's, well, an awful lot of it. And then we will be using the time in class for discussion. So we'll have to figure out the best way to handle that. Let me show you a couple of useful features on MyFire. On over here. Okay, so this is our announcements page. I'm sure you've used it before. Right now I have listed the PDF for today's lecture notes, as well as the list of our readings, with both the literary readings and sort of the tool readings. Want to call your attention to a couple of things under content here. Course information is the most useful part of the entire site, to be honest. You want to download a copy of the course syllabus and read it over. It's long, it's like 40 pages, but it does have the policies that you'll be using this quarter. They are very similar to the things in your other English classes, so it should be familiar. Down here, there's a good collection of course resources and rubrics. So I'll be talking about these individual assignment types in a few minutes, but you want to bookmark these or possibly just print them out so you have them, because that's going to be your starting point for understanding the main assignments in here. There are also a couple of links. There's a study guide for the final coming up, as well as some instructions on using Brightspace. MyFire. It used to be Brightspace. So if you're unfamiliar with the interface, or if you're new to SCU, take a look at those. You can always email me with any questions. The other part you'll be using most is on the left-hand side here, going through week by week. And each week has aim, learn, and apply. This explains what we're doing for the week. So a few paragraphs on our objectives in the course introduction, links to our readings. I think pretty much all of these are in the anthology as well. So if you just want to grab that PDF, I give you a Dropbox link to it because the file's pretty big. Then you can find those in the contents page. Just have one file instead of 5 for each day. There are some online readings each week, as well as a couple of resources, or typically videos to read. And then there's a bunch of supplemental stuff. These are not required, like we're not going to be covered on the exams or the quizzes, but it does give you a supplemental set of tools and ideas. So if you are new to studying literature, if it's been a few years since your last lit class, or if it's something you're not as confident in, definitely take a look at those to help you. The apply section is our assignments. So I'm going to go through these actually later on today. I don't want to spend too much time here, but make sure you at least click through each of these and understand what's expected of you. And you can see the deadlines here for each of those. The rest of the features should be pretty familiar to you. This may look a little bit different on your end, but activities and assignments will give you links to the different kinds of work we'll be doing. I'm going to walk through those in a couple minutes. So we'll switch back to PowerPoint here. Okay, some logistical things. We are meeting as a group from 10 to 1:45 Eastern. I'm actually out in California, so it is bright and early, 7 a.m. when we start class here. If I'm a little droopy, that's why. I assume you guys know which room to meet in because you're in that room right now, but I'm sure Mary will keep you posted if anything changes there. My plan is to focus most of our meetings on discussion after this one. So that will take place from 10 to noon. By that point, you'll have I will have posted my lecture video introducing the assignment, so we can discuss any questions you have about doing those. Some of the instructions on MyFi are not always clear, but most of the time we'll be looking at specific readings. We don't have time to cover everything, so what I've done is selected readings to focus on for our discussions. I'll give you that list in, I think, the next slide. You will take your lunch break from 12 to 12:45, and then after that, that last hour, work independently on your homework. I will be in this Zoom room all the way from basically 10 to 2. So after we finish our discussions, you can feel free to check back in if you want me to look at an assignment you're working on, or if you have questions about the papers, or just want to discuss maybe topic ideas. That's the place to do that. And I find that that's easier to handle than just trying to get everything by email back and forth, particularly because we're on an asynchronous schedule. And then there's our Zoom link, which I also emailed out to you. Here's our discussions schedule. So we're going to defer Raising the Sun. We might come back to that a little bit on the 28th, just to make sure we handle any outstanding questions, because your first paper will be about that text. And so I want to make sure we have a chance to at least talk some about that. But then starting next week, we'll focus on Sunny's Blues and A Pair of Tickets. Follow that up with Yellow Wallpaper and Lives of the Dead. These are all short stories. Some are novellas, a little bit longer. In weeks 4 and 5, you will have the choice of taking quizzes and writing responses about, I think, a set of 3. There are 3 sets of poems, basically. And you'll pick one of those for your assignments, but I can't really predict what everyone's going to pick. So on the 11th, we're going to be discussing the Speaking Through Nature collection in class. So you can please take a look at those to prepare for that, and then you can use the others if you want to do other assignments on them. And on the 18th, we'll look at Love and Brokenness. As we wrap up the quarter, we're going to switch to Things Fall Apart. The first 13 chapters, and it's not a very long book, so that's about, 100 pages or so, 125 pages in this edition. We'll cover in week 6, and we'll finish up the last, 80 or so pages for week 7. Week 8, you're going to be focused on the final paper and final exam, so we're not going to have any extra discussion then, but we will meet to kind of go over that and practice some of the questions. So I know there's a lot of reading in this class, probably more than you'd cover in some 15-week courses, but that's SEU for you. So I want to make sure you're prepared to handle those readings in particular, and use those as sort of models for how to approach the rest of the stuff if you want to write about different things for your papers. In terms of the assignments, there are several categories, and they're sort of peppered throughout the quarter. So if you remember back to 1133 and 1233, you had homeworks on Saturday and Tuesday. It's going to be the same basic schedule. So I'm going to break down each week what's due that week and sort of give you some tips on how to accomplish that. But I want to give you an overview first of the kind of work you'll be doing. So do take a look at the content page I showed you on MyFire earlier, and be aware that some of the assignments will take longer to prepare, and there's more reading probably than you're used to in a comp class. So budget time for that. If you can, even budgeting 30 minutes to an hour every day. I think the syllabus estimated that students spend about 7 to 8 hours a week on homework for this course. If you are new to analyzing literature, you might need to add a few hours on that just to get your head around some of this stuff, because we are reading some older texts that may be harder to read. So you're going to have to budget your time carefully to get through all that. The literary analysis papers are going to be the longer ones. So the first one, that's going to be between 750 and 1,000 words. the MyFire listings use pages. I just convert that at 250 words a page. It's much easier to plan, I find, that way. So that one will be on A Raisin in the Sun, but there will be a list of topics to choose from, and we'll go over those later today. You're going to be working on that over the course of 4 weeks. So it's not actually a lot of writing for just that one paper, especially if you're used to these kinds of classes. This week, you will be choosing a topic from the list, and the topics are more, here's an approach to the play, rather than here's the specific thing you must write about. That will be due on the 27th, and I'll talk through that in a minute. In week 2, on November 3rd, you write a rough draft. In week 3, you will get my feedback on that rough draft, and from the 7th to the 10th, you will be doing a peer workshop. You will be posting the draft for peer critique on the 7th, and then by the 10th, you have to submit that on MyFire. And based on the feedback from both sources, you'll write the revised draft in week 4 that will be due on the 17th. The calendar on MyFire has all of these dates built in, but you will want to transfer them to your Google Calendar or your phone or whatever you use to keep track of your assignments, because there's a lot of moving parts in this course. Later on this quarter, you're going to write literary analysis number 2. That one's longer, and this one functions more like a research paper. So you will include some secondary sources. We're going to talk more about that when we get closer to the assignment, because this is later, like week 7, week 8. So you will formally choose a topic in week 7 and do an outline similar to the one you're doing this week. That will be due on December 8th. You will move very quickly, though, through this paper. So the self-review we do on the 14th and the final draft on the 15th, and I think the final exam is on the 16th. That's going to be a very busy week, so you need to start thinking about this early. You can write it on any reading this quarter, and the literary readings, of course, except Raisin in the Sun, because that's topic of your first paper. So if you're interested in novels, then you might want to read ahead and things fall apart and think how you might approach that text. Or if you find some of the poetry or short stories that you really like, we can start talking early about what that might look like. I don't expect anyone to put 2,000 words together in the space of a week and a half. So plan for that early and decide how that might look, and I'm glad to talk through that in office hours or just take some time in class to go over the options there. So those are your 2 big papers. You will also complete 4 reading engagements. These are called REs on MyFire. These are weeks 3, 4, 5, and 6. So some of them overlap with the literary analysis assignments, but you also kind of use these to prepare for that sort of work. And these work very differently than your typical response papers. So a couple of things in terms of the logistics for this assignment. On MyFire, you'll find a list of 9 assignment options. And they're not like write a paper on this text. Some of them are creative. Some of them are analytical. Giving you a couple examples here. If you are the type to write poems or songs, those of you in the worship track, this could be a good option for you. Then write a few short poems or short songs and record them. You don't have to play with them a whole class, but send a video or put it on YouTube. And they should engage in some way with the readings that you're doing for that week. So you're basically going to match up one of the RE techniques, one of the RE approaches to the readings for that week. And the trick is you can't repeat an assignment. So of the 9, you'll pick 4. And there's a good mix of them. One of the analytical ones I give here is researching and delivering a short biographical speech about the author's life. So you might read up on, well, not Hansberry exactly, but some of the poems and say, how does this person's experience help me understand how this text works a little bit better? These take more prep time than you might think. So take a look today at the list of options and start thinking not just which of these would fit better with the kind of work I enjoy doing and the stuff that I'm good at, because you're going to be busy this quarter and you want to make sure this is something you can actually stay engaged in. But also start thinking, as you do those literary readings, how could I apply these RE prompts to those? So that will be some prep work. Again, you're welcome to talk to me either by email or in office hours about options for those assignments and kind of how those would go together, because there's a lot of different ways that could go, especially the creative stuff. So take a look at that today. And then everybody's favorite assignment in online courses since the beginning of time, the discussion forum posts. Yay, more discussion forum posts. We love them so much. MyFire is built around these. So these will be more traditional response papers. Each week you typically write one primary post of 200 to 300 words. That's an analytical response in some way to the readings. Sometimes there's a creative element, as in the week one, which I'll go through in a few minutes. And then you'll write responses to two of your classmates' posts. The instructions for the specific content change every week. So there's another thing you want to look at early. These are all listed on MyFire. Just go to the discussions section and look through that. There is the link to that. For each week, it is set up so you have to post your own paper before you can view and respond to others. The primary posts are due Saturday nights, and the response posts are due Tuesday nights. I've just finished teaching a section, two sections actually. I finished 1133, Composition 1, and a lot of students missed points they didn't need to miss because they would write their Saturday night posts and then completely forget about the Tuesday nights because everything else was due on Tuesday, so everything got frazzled. Put both of them on your schedule, ideally ahead of time. So start thinking on Friday at least, I need to draft and possibly post my main primary posts. These are going to be a page or two. And on Monday, I need to post the responses. In fact, it might help just to keep an eye on the threads throughout Saturday and Sunday, Friday, Saturday rather, people are going to be posting. And if you see something you're interested in, maybe go ahead and draft a response for that as well. Again, the specific instructions will vary, so take a look at them on MyFire. I think there's 1 week where you will post a total of 4, one primary post and 3 responses, but most of them will be one primary post and 2 responses. So if you're budgeting your writing time, you're probably looking at 600, 750 words a week on this, which is about 3 pages. So build that into your mental and physical workload for the quarter. Important thing about this SEU's policy is that no late work is accepted on these because the idea is that you respond to each other's posts. So that policy is spelled out under late work on page 9 of your syllabus. What that means on a practical level is I go through typically on Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon, and I check all of the posts. If you have, for most weeks, the one primary post and 2 responses, and all the requirements, and they're easy points. But if you forget to do the responses, that's half of the points off. These are usually 20-point assignments, so you get 10 for the primary and 5 for each of the responses. And if you somehow manage to forget all of it, that's a 0. And those add up very quickly. That's often the difference between an A and a B, or even an A and a B minus, or in some cases a C. So I don't want to have to give C's out if you're doing A-level work. Keep on top of that as best you can. Because this is a literature class, we will have a series of quizzes as well as a final exam. So I'm going to tell you what to expect on those. The weekly quizzes will be in weeks 1 through 5 and week 7. So you get a break in week 6 and week 8. Week 6, we're just starting, things fall apart. So you'll take a longer quiz in week 7 instead of having 2 in each of those weeks. These are open book, open notes quizzes, but they're fairly long, 10 to 15 questions with a 30-minute time limit. So I would not recommend just opening the quiz and assuming you can find all of the answers and do it well in 30 minutes. Instead, read through the literature carefully a couple of times, especially for the shorter works, as well as the articles on tools and techniques. I've previewed all the quizzes, and they have about an 80-20 mix. So about 80% of the questions are on the literature, and it will be stuff like plot details. It will be applying the techniques to say, what kind of literary device is this? Simile, metaphor, random word, other random word, and you can choose the right one. So you'll be applying everything in these quizzes. Everything on here is multiple choice or true false, so you do get a grade on the quiz immediately. If you have a question about why a certain answer is marked one way, let me know. I'll be glad to go back and look through those, because sometimes there are glitches in the matrix, so to speak. You have, as in a traditional classroom, one chance to take these quizzes each week. So make sure you have a reliable internet connection for the full 30 minutes. If possible, find some time that is relatively quiet and where you have the energy and time to devote to that for the full 30. You may not need it, especially if you did the readings well, but better to have that time and not need it than to try to rush through everything at the last minute. Of course, our final exam is a much bigger assignment that will have 50 questions and have 2 hours. All the readings are fair game, but most of the questions there are from the weekly quizzes. So as you take your quizzes, once you submit it, you should get a screen with your score and the list of stuff you got right and wrong. Save that or print it out. I'm not actually sure from the student end if you can go back and review old quizzes. If you can't get that data, tell me. I will go through on my end. I know I can pull up all your quiz attempts, and I'll send you that information. This is your best study guide for the final exam, going over those old quizzes to remind yourself of what sort of questions are asked and what were the details that you remembered or didn't remember on those. So again, even though this is open book, you will not have time to go back and find everything from scratch. We will have a session in week 8 just on studying for the final exam and do some simulations there. I'll give you some sample questions, but this will be obviously our big project, and it's due right after the second paper. So finals week is going to be a bear. That's just kind of how we have to do things in 8 weeks. All right. Before I go through the week 1 stuff specifically, are there any questions about the overall assignments for this quarter?
No.
Okay. And you can check out my file for details on most of those. So here's what we're doing this week. Our big reading is A Raisin in the Sun. It's about 150 pages in the PDF. If you don't want to read in a PDF for that long, it is in the anthology as well. There's also a link on MyFire to a separate PDF. I just got the ebook on Amazon, which I think was $5, so not terrible if it's a little easier to read in the Kindle format. Most of your quiz questions will be from that, and of course, writing your first paper on that as well. We're also looking at several poems. A few poems this time. Actually, one was an essay. So, Maya Angelou's poem "Still I Rise," Hold on Mar's poem "Sympathy," and Langston Hughes' "I Too Sing America." I'd also like you to read Martin Luther King Jr.'s essay "Letter from Birmingham Jail." That's longer than all of the poems. I think all the poems put together. But it's sort of this touchstone text of the civil rights movement, which is the middle of everything, all the political context for what Hansberry is writing about in Raisin in the Sun. And one of your options for the first paper will be to compare Raisin to one of these texts. You'll also be looking at 3 short essays on literary technique. Very important one, Patricia Kane's handout, How to Do a Close Reading. Not very long, but a lot of good advice on tackling literature. Also have you do 2 short readings on point of view in literature as well as narration. You'll want to read both of those, point of view and narrator, before you do the week 1 discussion forum, because that will come back in that content. I'll talk about that shortly. And then there are 2 videos to watch. One is on the genre of drama. This runs about 9 minutes. And one is on how to write about literature. That's longer at 20 minutes, but very useful for the rest of the quarter. So I would recommend in the next couple of days, starting on the play. I'll probably budget about 2 to 3 hours of total time to read the play. Maybe shorter if you're used to reading that stuff from that period or that author. And from there, focusing on the 2 videos that'll give you a sense of how to approach this, and then go into the technique readings to help you prepare for the homework assignments. You will take a quiz on these readings anytime before Saturday the 24th, and the quizzes close down at 11:59 p.m. I think you can still extend access, but it'll mark it as late, and there will be great penalties there. So budget your time to get all that done. I would go through today and say, what else do I have Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, and figure out when you can make time for all those assignments. Your discussion post starts with a creative exercise. So obviously you need to read Raisin in the Sun first, because you're going to be picking a 1 to 2 page scene, like from anywhere in the play, and rewriting it like a short story. So in kind of standard narrative form. You're going to aim for 300 to 500 words for that narration, and you can use first person or third person. You need to assign a narrator character for this paper, because plays don't have narrators in the traditional sense. You basically just have the characters delivering their lines, and then there are these things called stage directions, which sometimes will specify how the characters look, how they're dressed. It'll talk about the scene, like the actual physical setting. It may have things like the actions that they take. They're crossing the stage. They have a certain tone of voice as they're delivering this line. They're being sarcastic here. And those are designed as much for the actors as for the audience. Try to figure out, how do you deliver this, at least in how the author imagined it. So you want to pay attention to both of those as you decide how to approach this paper. One option you could use is to write from the narrative standpoint of one of the actual characters in the play. So most of the action is kind of focused on the grown-ups, particularly Walter Lee, Ruth, Mama, and Beneatha. Walter Lee and Beneatha are brother and sister, and Ruth is Walter's wife. But they have a son, and so you might think, how would he see this scene differently? What is he going to notice? How is he going to describe the characters? And so part of this narration is going to bring in those details about what you think that character would feel, think, or do. So that's why I recommend the point of view in literature and narrator readings early. Your other option is to invent a narrator. So this is someone who's not in the play, like not interacting with the characters, but is sort of describing them. And so this can actually be kind of fun, because you can add commentary that we don't actually get in the play. In the response post, this will be particularly important, because after you write your own scene, you're going to respond by analyzing how 2 classmates write their scenes, and specifically discussing the narrative technique that they use. So one of the things you'll learn about in the readings for this week is different types of narrators, different styles of narration. Your response post needs to identify what kind of narrator your classmate used, and discuss how the rewrite compares to the original. So you can think about it sort of like the movie adaptation of a book, or a reboot of a series or something like that. Now this is a fairly advanced technique, honestly, especially for week one of an intro to literature course. So you do want to take your time to develop this. Those of you who are living over at Kenyon Square, you can feel free to show each other drafts and to talk about, is this working? Does this make sense? It's perfectly fine if you write about the same scene as someone else, because you're going to come up with different perspectives and different ideas, maybe even different characters to narrate that. So that will be the discussion assignment. As I mentioned, the Saturday deadline for the main one, the Tuesday for the response posts. You will also, as I mentioned, be working on literary analysis 1, starting with picking a topic and choosing and writing an outline for that. So this list is also on MyFire, but I want to give you a rundown of your topic options for this first paper. Your first option is to identify a specific theme or a topic that Hansberry addresses in Raisin in the Sun. So you might think about, how does she talk about racial relations? Or how does she talk about Africa? How does she talk about wealth or poverty? How does she talk about religion? You might think about family dynamics. How do the characters relate to each other? How do they bring up some difficult questions? What are the important things to these characters and to this author? We're going to come back to this a little bit, actually, I think next week, once you have a chance to read the play and talk about some options there. The video, How to Write About Literature, will help you identify themes, and there are lots of good study notes and resources on the web about this play. So if you want to pull up the Spark Notes or Cliff Notes or other kinds of notes, you're welcome to do that to inform your ideas and to help you identify things you could write about. But of course, you can't just copy what they say. That would be plagiarism. Plagiarism is bad. If you choose this, you'll want to identify 3 to 4 specific scenes, kind of moments in the drama that bring out this theme. So maybe a place where the characters are describing that or talking about it, or where for a relationship, how does this differ? Maybe how they develop. Second option is to compare how the script is performed, how the play is performed in film. There are several recordings available, both of live performances and movies on YouTube. So you can look up for Raisin in the Sun there. And what I want you to do if you choose this option is to look at one specific scene, a fairly short one, and look at the performance choices that different versions of this make. Because they're of course going to be different actors. Sometimes they will adapt the setting or the stage, like build a different kind of set. Sometimes they will change details about the characters, costumes, periods, all this stuff, but still kind of tell the same story. So if you're interested in film or drama, this would be a good option to write about, because your job is to analyze what's different in those interpretations and why might those differences be significant. So your argument will be less about how do you personally interpret the play and more about what is interesting about how the different directors and different actors do this. If you're having trouble finding productions for this, let me know. I can point you to some resources. Third option is to think specifically about tensions. There's a lot of conflicts in this play. Some conflicts are represented by different characters. For instance, Beneatha has 2 sort of love interests in the play, and they have very different ideas about what it means to be Black in America. The characters in the family have very different ideas about money, about race, about religion. There is conflict between husbands and wives and parents and children. There is conflict between neighbors in one scene. There's a lot of conflict. I don't want to give away the ending, but one of the key points in the play has to do with racial integration in a new neighborhood in terms of housing. And this is one reason why this play was so influential, because it played out a lot of the debates and arguments and conflicts that were going on in the society at the time. So what you want to do in this option is pick one of those oppositions, one of those tensions, and look at how 3 or 4 characters deal with that. They might have different approaches. Lastly, you have a comparative option. So you are reading poems as well as the play for week 1, including King's essay. Compare 2 of those texts, just 2, because you don't have room for much. And you're going to pick whatever you think is particularly interesting about that pair of texts. So some options here, thinking about different values, different desires. What do the people or the characters want? What are their struggles? King's piece is nonfiction. He's writing about his actual experience. It's sort of like a political manifesto. Raisin in the Sun is obviously fiction. It's a drama, but it's also very political. And so you might think about how do they address these similar questions in different ways. With the poems, you're going to have to do a different kind of work, because obviously the poems are shorter than both the play and the essay. But there could be ways to bring in themes or interpretations. So if you are more interested in poetry than drama, option 4 would be a good one for you, because you can bring in some of those skills as well. As you do the readings for this week, you'll get a sense of what's going to work best in a paper like that. But keep these options in mind as you read the play and think what sort of stuff fits best with your interests and the kind of work that you want to do in this paper. So as I mentioned, you'll be developing this project over the course of the first 4 weeks. You don't have to have everything in place for this week. What you are doing is putting an outline together. So on the assignment instructions, they're linked on MyFire, particularly the course resources there. There is a sample of a sentence outline. I want you to follow that and kind of fill in the blanks, as it were, with your proposal for this paper. So you want to specify which of those 4 approaches you're taking, and then kind of go through and fill out the types of evidence and what claims you want to make. You have the option of this paper of using secondary sources if you want, but you don't have to. So if you find it helpful to analyze narration in terms of your theme, you can bring in observations from your readings on point of view and narration. Or if you want to get really ambitious, you could pull up articles in literary journals or on reputable websites to improve your argument there. If you do want to use an outside source, please let me know first so I can give you the okay on if that's going to work, or I can help you find sources as well. And again, the skills you learned in 1233 in particular will be helpful for that there. For the actual outline, I'm looking for a working thesis claim. The supplementary materials for this week will have lots of stuff on the thesis. And you may remember the lectures on that, on thesis development from 1133 and 1233 as well. You'll have a list of 3 to 4 subclaims, so these are your body paragraphs. Each of those should have examples of specific parts of the text you're going to talk about, whether that's just in the drama or in that comparison. And it helps to have specific quotes, because you're going to analyze those, particularly in option 1, where you're looking at the themes and a proposed conclusion. And I want to emphasize that this is a starting point. It's not the ending point of your argument. So if you change directions as you go, that's okay. If you go to a completely new topic, we should probably sit down and talk about that to see how that's going to work, just because papers coming together very quickly. Even 4 weeks, it goes faster than you think. So what I'm looking for here is just 2 to 3 pages of what your paper is going to look like in general terms and where you anticipate finding the most useful evidence there. If you're having trouble identifying evidence, send me an email, set up an appointment, and we can talk through some options for that as well. This is due at the end of this work week, Tuesday the 27th by midnight. So you'll want to pick a topic pretty early to give yourself time to develop that. All right, I have been talking at you for quite a while. So it's 8 o'clock here, which means 11 there. Let's go ahead and take 10 minutes, stretch, get water, figure all that stuff out, and then we'll come back and I'll give you a little more details about how I approach this class. So I'll see you in about 10 minutes. So in the time we have left for today, I want to go over a model I've developed for arguing well in college classrooms. And those of you who took my class for 1233 or 1133 will probably remember this. So again, apologize for the flashbacks. I call this arguing like a grown-up. And I have set this up, believe it or not, I actually wrote this before 2020 happened. But I have been teaching writing for 15 years, and I've noticed that a lot of the bad arguments out there, whether they're in the classroom or on Twitter, do not fail because they have poor evidence or because the delivery doesn't quite work, or even because the people involved don't really like each other. They fail because we have stopped arguing and started kind of talking past each other or just talking at each other. Now, this can be in some sense an emotionally satisfying way to have a discussion because you don't actually have to engage with anyone else's thoughts or ideas. You don't have to question anything you believe, and you certainly don't have to change your behavior, which is clearly how Jesus operated, right? But it doesn't really help us in putting together conversations and figuring out how do we actually talk to each other. So I focused this on 5 critical practices, which I'll go over in a minute here. And in part, they are useful for face-to-face contexts because we still argue with each other. We still disagree on things from as trivial as where should we go to lunch and as important as is there a God? But I think that we have certain advantages in face-to-face arguments that don't always transfer well to writing. And the fact is most of our interaction is written. We send emails, we send text messages, we argue on social media. And many of the people that you may communicate with, you may never actually see in the flesh. So we lose a lot of communication. We don't have tone of voice where you can't say, oh yes, I am totally being serious right now. I would never be sarcastic. No, not me. You often are talking to people maybe that you don't know or that you only know online. And so the relational styles and the relational standards that develop for communication just don't work. Those of you who have a roommate, you learn to talk to each other in certain ways. You learn that certain phrases signal maybe an emotional state, or you learn that some topics are just better left not broached if you want to have any semblance of peace in the room. But you also learn to deal with each other's strengths and weaknesses, deal with each other's personality, and to figure out how that is going to affect your daily conversations. And you don't even have to talk for it. You can probably walk into the room, and if you know the other person in there well, you can tell how they're feeling and whether they want to talk at all based on how they're sitting down or what the expression on their face is or any of that. And the closer you are, usually the better you can figure that out. And particularly in interpersonal relationships, the better you are at figuring that out, the more peaceful the argument can go. So as I was developing this, I was partly thinking about how can we establish sort of a mindset, establish a set of practices that can counteract some of these weaknesses of written arguments, but also how can I be kind of faithful to what I understand about human nature. And I kept coming back to this verse in 1 Corinthians. When I was a child, I spoke like a child, I thought like a child, I reasoned like a child. When I became a man, I gave up childish ways. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, then I shall know fully, even as I have been fully known. Or as the Gen Z version puts it, I used to be a noob, now I'm not a noob. Look up the Gen Z Bible sometime. It's a little scary and very funny. Now, you guys are all Bible college students. What is the overarching theme of 1 Corinthians 13? What word shows up a lot there? 4 letters rhymes with dove. Hey, there we go. Now, it's kind of interesting to me that this would show up in a chapter about how to love each other, both in the church and outside of it, because Paul is talking about maturity in one sense, how to act like a grown-up. And he points out in the first part of the verse that this is a process. Nobody is born knowing how to make a good argument. And Paul could make really good arguments. But he follows that up with this sort of caveat about how we even approach this question of knowing. How do we understand knowledge in itself? And he says that we are not going to know everything perfectly now. That even when we deal with each other, literally face to face, it's like we are only looking at a dirty mirror, a reflection that's sort of all covered up. And he's looking forward and thinking, at some point, I will not only know partly, I will be able to know fully. Now you see the language echoed there from the Old Testament of being known fully. Think of Psalm, search and know me, that sort of language there. And so he puts this after 10 verses of saying, if I do this but I don't have love, I'm worthless. And then verse 13 is something along the lines of these 3 things remain, hope, faith, and love, but the greatest of these is love. And honestly, I kind of wish that he had put something like the greatest of these is really crushing your opponents, because that's a lot easier than loving them. But it is what it is. And so I want to think through how can we show that attitude, but also argue well in the process. And this is what I've come up with. 5 practices. First one is to acknowledge the complexity of what we're dealing with. Because it doesn't matter how well you have studied an issue, how strong your opinion is, how much evidence you have, you know, as Paul says, partly, because you don't understand everything, even as a college student. I know it's hard to imagine not knowing everything when you're between the ages of 18 and 25, but it does happen. And one reason for this is we are dealing with things created by people, particularly literature. When you read a passage, when you read a poem or a short story or a novel or a play, you are reading a creative output from someone who, I'm going to go out on a limb here, is pretty messed up, is another sinful human being, and is trying to make sense of the world. And to a point, we can understand that and relate to that, but there's always going to be that gap there. because we're dealing with messy, complicated humans who produce messy, complicated ideas. And so this model starts with humility, understanding there's more on heaven and earth than is dreamt of in our philosophies, even our Christian philosophies. The second principle in putting together an argument like a grown-up is to focus on ideas, both your own and people you're reading and writing about, rather than feelings. Now, it doesn't mean getting rid of emotion. Emotion is important. Even for introverts like me, emotion is an actual thing, which is really annoying sometimes. And I think we should understand how that works within arguments, especially in creative texts that are making arguments, because it's a part of the human experience. That when you have a poem like Harlem, which I read to you at the start of class, when you have a play like A Raisin in the Sun, one reason those exist is to express a series of emotions. They make the characters alive, realistic. And so those cannot be divorced completely from the arguments. But that doesn't mean that we can only rely on emotions. The problem is that emotions tend to short circuit discussion. See also every single political discussion since 2016. We're not really interested in talking to each other anymore. We're interested in screaming at each other so that the people who are already on our side are going to say, wow, great virtue you just signaled there. This is a problem. So our third principle is to use evidence clearly and honestly. For this, I go to Thomas Sowell, who's an economist. He wrote, facts do not speak for themselves. They speak for or against competing theories. Facts divorced from theories or visions are mere isolated curiosities. And I love that phrase, isolated curiosities, because it describes so much of the information that we have available to us. We live in a golden age of data, of information. You don't even have to type it in anymore. You can ask Siri or Google or Alexa or whichever assistant you have in your pocket at the moment. Sounds a little creepy when you say it like that. But the problem is, what do you do with that information? How do you present the data that you have about a quote from a text or a claim in an essay or even a verse in the Bible and make it both relevant and accurate to what you're doing? Because on some level, it doesn't matter how many times you quote Jeremiah 29:11 or Philippians 4:13, it doesn't actually mean that God's going to win the football game for you, or that everything is going to go well in your life, or that you're going to be happy all the time. And so we have to take the evidence on its own terms and be clear about how we're using it. And I think that's a good antidote to focusing just on feelings, because if you have to give evidence, then you've got to go somewhere beyond, this is how this makes me feel. I had a professor in high school, and one of her rules was, if you start a sentence with the words, I feel, you have to end with my fingers. Other than that, you think, you argue, you claim, you suggest, but you do not feel. Part of using evidence well is our fourth principle, taking opposing viewpoints seriously. Now, I'm not saying make nice or agree with everybody. In fact, I think one of the marks of making a useful counter-argument is to start by taking that view seriously. Because if you don't, then why are you bothering to argue with it? If you think that your opponent is so stupid and so misguided and so ignorant of the issues, then you're not going to put the time and energy into trying to understand them. You're going to put up a straw man and say, here is a weak caricature of what I think the other side believes, and clearly they're idiots, so I'm going to demolish the straw man. It's like if you were arguing about immigration policy, And the two options were either you love America or hate America. That is not a useful way to have an argument because nobody wants to be on the wrong side. So, as you engage with text you either agree with or disagree with, or do both at once, I want you to remember to be respectful of their arguments and the people behind them, especially when that person happens to be in the room, but also rigorous in how you approach that. The best way to critique an argument is to understand it thoroughly. If you can't start by saying, okay, here's what this other person is saying, is claiming, to have them actually recognize it and say, yes, that's what I mean, then you're in a really tough spot to make a response to that. So lastly, the bedrock of all this is to respect everyone's right to free speech. We're at a university. This is a big part of a university education, because if you go through all 4 years at SCU and you have not heard any new ideas or opinions or beliefs from the ones you heard in the first roughly 12 years of your existence, 18 years of your existence, 12 years of schooling, you should ask for your money back. I don't think they'll give it to you, but the point of college is to expose yourself to new ideas. And some of those you're going to think are absolutely stupid, and some of those you're going to think are absolutely wrong, and some of those you're going to be flat out offended that they actually exist. Deal with it. The point of learning in a free society is to learn both from the people we like and agree with and the people we despise, love less, and disagree with. So as you put together your arguments, I want you to be wise as serpents in how you present yourself and innocent as doves, because there are consequences to free speech, and those might be relational consequences. If you tell your significant other or your friends or your professor exactly what you think, there might be professional consequences. And so it's always a balancing act. How do you be responsible but also be kind? How do you be rigorous but also be loving? And I don't do this perfectly. Sometimes I don't do it very well at all. You can ask my wife. But I think it's a good starting point for making the kind of arguments that are important in a class like this and in an environment like this. So this is what I will encourage you to use to kind of, as a checklist, see if your arguments work this way. And as we move into discussions in the next 7 weeks, going through some of this literature, then I hope we will be able to model these as well. Last thing I want to go over for today is some advice on getting an A in this course, which I'm going to assume that everybody wants. If you don't want an A, please email me so I don't have to grade your papers, because that takes up a lot of time. First thing you want to do well in this course is to figure out what your priorities are and understand how they interact. And I use that verb interact deliberately because you all have multiple priorities, as do I. You have other classes you're dealing with. You have some sort of work responsibilities, whether that's an internship or in a part-time job or both. I have 3 jobs at the moment. I've got a busy quarter. And you all have family responsibilities. Maybe that is primarily taking care of yourself right now, but I have worked with students who are full-time parents or who are taking care of their parents or their grandparents. I worked with students who are foster parents or are in the process of an adoption and have giant time-consuming responsibilities at home, and they have trouble prioritizing their English class. Well, let me tell you, don't prioritize your English class. This is not the most important thing in your life. But you do have to understand where your responsibilities lie and how those might work together. So let me show you how this might work. this is my beautiful wife, Esther. And in a perfect world, I would have no other responsibilities except to make her happy. We do not live in a perfect world, so I actually have to work for a living. And she has to work for a living. She works here at California State University. And so we have had to decide what our different priorities are and how we can work around that in this context. So I mentioned interaction. The opposite of that would be competition. And this is where you end up with phrases like, well, yeah, you're my friend, but she's a better friend. She's my best friend. Those friend rankings, which make everything about junior high and high school so awkward, right? Or you might say, yeah, I want to do well in school, but church has to be more important. Or I want to go out and spend some time with you, but I've really got to write this paper. And if you're just thinking in terms of competition, then you get into fights very easily. And you start talking about, well, I thought you liked me better than your job, which is, there's no good conversation that happens after that line. Instead, think about how different priorities meet different goals. So I want to be a better professor. And that means I have to practice. I have to secure teaching positions. I have to prepare for my classes. I have to work on tasks and PowerPoints and lectures and everything there. And that takes time away from things I want to do more. Just yesterday, for example, normally during the evenings, my wife and I go out and we take a walk around the neighborhood. We spend about an hour just getting some exercise, talking to each other, kind of catching up on our days, because even though we're both telecommuting, we spend most of our times in our offices glued to Zoom for various meetings. And I couldn't do that yesterday because I had to write a lecture. Ta-da, here's the lecture. And that was kind of annoying. But I knew that it was necessary because we had both priorities to satisfy here. We had commitments to each other, certainly, but we had to negotiate among them for that time period. And it works both ways. During the week, other than our walks, we don't have a lot of like date night time, but so we take weekends, which is why you're not going to get a lot of emails back from me on weekends. So rather than thinking this is important, but I'm going to do something else, or these two things are both important to me, but I have to choose this priority every single time, I want you to start with the importance and say, because this is important to me, I'm going to make this choice. I'm going to make this sacrifice. I'm going to use my time and my resources in this way. The second thing you can do to get an A in this course is to gather the resources you have together, especially your time, and to use them effectively in all the 100 million things you have to do this quarter. I'm going to tell you something very scary. You are never going to be less busy than you are right now. And you're probably thinking, do you know how much homework I have? Yes, I do actually. I've been there and I've done that. I went to way too many classes. I have 4 degrees. But I also know that as you gain more responsibilities, as your relationships change, as your job changes, you're going to be doing more different things, and some of them will not always start at 8 in the morning. Some of them will start earlier. And so you need to get in the habit now of figuring out where those resources are and what you can do. So when you get a new assignment, doesn't matter what class it's in, ask yourself, what do I already know here? Because nobody comes into a class like this with a blank slate. You've taken other writing classes. You've read other books. You have a general idea, at least, of what literature is. You have done some sort of reading that compares to the work you're doing here. And it doesn't matter what subject you're studying, you can apply the skills that you already have to the work you need to do. My other class this quarter is business writing, teaching it at University of California. And right now, my students are writing their resumes and cover letters. And a lot of them are really scared about those documents because they're applying for relatively advanced jobs, using their major. They're all business majors. And many of them have been working in restaurants or retail for their whole careers, which makes a lot of sense because they're college students. And so one thing they have to do is figure out, how are my skills relevant? How do I make that argument to an employer? You can do the same thing to yourself. What do you already know about this material that you can apply? A big part of this is going to be scheduling and time management, because your schedule will run you over if you let it in an 8-week quarter, particularly because you just finished another 8-week quarter and you don't get a real break until Christmas. So I want you to take some time this week and think, where in my schedule can I make room for my priorities? Maybe you already know what hours approximately you're going to work. Maybe you already know where your internship is going to be and when you have to be there. But I can tell you right now, you're going to have to make some negotiations. You're going to have to make some compromises. And some of those, I know this is hard to hear in Christian school, but some of those are going to involve church. You will have less time to devote to the ministries you're active in. You'll have less time to hang out with your church friends. You'll have less time to serve. And it kind of sucks, because we'd all like to have all the time and all the energy to do all the things, but we don't. So take a look at your schedules and figure out, where are you going to work? And especially, when can you have those bursts of focused work, instead of trying to figure out, okay, I'm going to be watching these videos for class, and I'll go ahead and write the paper at the same time. And oh yeah, there's that Netflix series there's to catch up on. And I think I can hang out at Starbucks at the same time, or whatever Starbucks is actually open these days. Doesn't work very well. Part of that is using your support networks. You have people in your life, both personal and professional, who care about you and who want you to succeed and are going to help you get there. You have people on the SUU Ohio campus like Mary and Dave, who spend a lot of their days thinking, how can I help not just the general SUU student body succeed, but this particular person? They do advising sessions. They answer emails and spend lots of time talking through, how can we help this student succeed in this course? How can we deal with this issue that's coming up? How can we make sure that the stupid Zoom room is meeting for this English class? That works on a professional level, but you also have people in your life who can help you work, who can help you balance what you need to do with you need to rest and occasionally even sleep. Sometimes that might look like saying, you've been studying for 6 hours, put the book away, we're going to go get ice cream. I'm assuming there's a Grater's or a Cold Stone or something in striking distance. If there isn't, go find one. They're awesome. And sometimes there are people who say, you've been spending a lot of time eating ice cream or drinking coffee or playing video games or whatever it is you actually enjoy. You should study. That paper is not going to write itself. Sometimes there are people who fill both of these roles at once. We call those people moms. Now, whoever that is in your life, maintain those relationships, because they're going to keep you sane in an 8-week quarter. And they will tell you when you need to work and when you need to take breaks. And you can do that for your friends and your classmates and your roommates as well. Lastly, be a cat. I mean, stay engaged in your own learning. If you can be a cat, then be a cat. Online classes Well, they're now an inevitable part of our educational experience, for better or worse. And the big challenge is keeping engaged with what you're doing when you don't have to come to class every day. Even in a class like this, a hybrid, you're in that classroom once a week for a couple of hours. The other 166 hours of your week, you have to fill with other stuff. And so it is astonishingly easy to say, I will do that discussion post thing later at some point in my week. And then you look up and the deadline was yesterday. I took one online course in my whole college career because when I was in college, computers existed, but only barely. And it was not my finest hour because I only had to show up for class for like 2 exams in the final. And every other time when I thought, oh yeah, I guess there was a homework or something due, then I would put it off, or I would only do the minimum reading or something, or I'd think, what chapter was that? I've got other stuff to do. I had to bust my butt to pull off a B in that class because I was not engaged in the ways that I was used to. I didn't put the extra effort in. And so I've learned that when I teach online now, which is full-time right now, I have to keep my students on task as best as I can. So in a course like this, anything in 8 weeks especially, you have to think about project management, not just in terms of your assignments, but in terms of how do I balance all the stuff that I have to do? How do I schedule that well? How do I organize my work time? That's going to be a key skill. And honestly, in 15 years of teaching, the students who do the best, most consistently in my classes are the ones who manage their projects well. They're not the ones who got an A in AP English in high school. They're not the ones who are naturally talented at writing. They're not the ones who went to the rich high school. They're the ones who can sit down and say, okay, I've got these 15 things to balance. How do I set up my schedule to do this well? So the easy part is to put your assignment deadlines in the calendar. MyFire has that set up for each class, but of course you want to duplicate that in your own calendars. The hard part is to schedule backwards from those deadlines and say in 3 days, really, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, 3 days, you got your first set of homework due in English 2133. What do I have to do between now and then, and when can I do it? And so that's going to mean taking the hour after lunch from 12:45 to 1:45 and reading or looking over all the homework assignments and deciding where can I start on something, or making sure you understand the MyFire interface, or reading the syllabus. It might mean eating in 15 minutes, grabbing that Chick-fil-A or the McDonald's or the Steak and Shake and getting back here and putting a few more minutes into the time. It may mean setting aside 30 minutes to talk to your professors. It may mean going to tutoring, maybe the Smart Thinking tutoring online. Or it might mean talking to Mary or one of the other advisors and saying, can you help me understand how to balance this stuff? But it does mean discipline. And if that's been a challenge for you in other areas of your life, then this class will be difficult. If that's something you do well, then this will be a little bit easier to handle. Lastly, we'll finish up class with this. As you learn more, as you read more, as you write more, try to put it in the context of what you already know. I suggested earlier, using that as the starting point. Instead of coming out with a blank paper, when you're writing the paper, do pre-writing exercises. Go back to 1133, 1233. Remember what you learned then. Connect the stuff that you're reading to something you already like. Connect it to a lesson maybe you learned earlier, or another text that you've read, or something that it reminds you of in your own experience. This is all about keeping yourself motivated, keeping yourself engaged, because you're not going to do the work 100% on your own. You're going to have that encouragement As much as all of you want to do well, to have that 4.0, it's not going to happen just by sheer force of will. It's going to have to be some combination of discipline and psychological work to be honest with yourself and to do the work that is assigned to you. Now, I am part of your support network. I'm here to help you succeed, to help you learn this stuff. I want you to feel free to use me as one of those resources. But I also want you to realize that this is hard work and that a lot of the structure you'll have to do yourself. If you would like some ideas on how to do that, or if you would like some feedback on approaches, I'm glad to talk through that because I've had my share of English classes over the years. All right, we're going to come back to Erasing the Sun next week once you've had a chance to read it and work through some of the ideas on the first paper. So plan to bring those texts with you. Honestly, if you have your laptop, just pull up the PDF so you have them easily available. We are also going to look at a couple other readings. So take a look at the lecture notes for today to remind yourself of where we've been. I will be putting up this video once I have a chance to do a little bit of editing up on YouTube and send you the link for that. And then later, probably over this weekend, I'll be putting up another video for the week 2 assignments and readings to get you prepared there as well. So that's all I have for you for today. If you have questions, you're welcome to stick around and talk through those. Otherwise, I'll let you go to lunch a little bit early and let you get started on your week 1 assignments. Thanks, guys.